Hey guys, and welcome back to Storytime with Hollow. That's me. Thank you for all your feedback on the previous ones. You clearly preferred how I did the last one, so I'm going to try and do that again. We're continuing on with Chapter 3 of Right Where We Belong, which is the fanfiction written by my friend Will, under the alias as Captain Fluke. So this is Chapter 3, Home is Where the Guns Are. Pocket, after finally pulling herself back from hysterical laughter, clambers onto her feet and lets out a heavy breath before half skipping over to the panel by the door and pressing a button. "Hey, Fluky Poo, you want me to start moving this cargo?" she calls down the speaker. "That'd be lovely, Pookie. Hollow's gonna come down and give you a hand too," Fluke replied through the intercom. Pocket nods and flicks the switch again before heading over to one of the overfilled racks of bags, crates and rucksacks and starts pulling things off the shelves and launching them to the back of the hull. The latch to the cockpit opens as Hollow climbs down the ladder and heavily drops onto the floor to find Pocket quickly and expertly moving these heavy stacks of equipment whilst humming to herself. "Hey, what do you need me to do?" Hollow asks, not wanting to mess up the maniacal system she may or may not have in place, as Pocket clambers up to grab a bag from the top of a rack. "Songbird's getting some work done, so we're taking most of this trash off," she replies, throwing down a few heavy bags before jumping back down herself. "Leave anything with a yellow and orange symbol on it, like this," she adds, before grabbing a small lockbox nearby and shoving it in Hollow's face. Hollow, slightly offset by her constantly excited demeanour, hesitates a moment before smiling, "Sure." Pocket smiles back before quickly spinning around and putting the lockbox back where it was, then grabbing the bags she threw down and dragging them to the back. Hollow joins her as they both begin stripping the walls of most of its items. After a few trips, he turns to Rage, who is still sitting by his bags, fiddling with his revolver. "You seriously not gonna help here, Rage?" he asks, annoyed. "Ugh," Rage sighs in an over-exaggerated manner. "I'm pretty tired from all that exploring and almost dying I did," he adds. Hollow's brow twinges in anger, but before he has a chance to respond, Pocket throws a large brown rucksack full of items directly at Rage, hitting him in the gut and cutting him off mid-sentence. "See? Now you're helping," she says in a sweet, upbeat yet heavily laden with sarcasm tone before continuing with what they were doing. Hollow laughs and also carries on as Rage rolls over to one side, grasping his stomach and trying to regain his breath. Fluke guided the ship closer and closer to the Lady Vengeance, the sun flowing into the cabin and illuminating the otherwise dreary and mechanical insides. Pulling up closer to the mammoth floating city reaffirmed its immense size compared to Songbird, with one of its many sails almost 4 times larger than the small black ship. As Fluke pulled up and over the top of the deck, he passed over the dozens of people walking around and working on the surface of the ship. Some adventurers and explorers, but most civilians. People who had nowhere else to turn. The deck itself covered in a mix of weapons for protection and homes and market stands, made up of nothing more than cloth tied together and tables. Adults and the elderly, those who couldn't fight, slowly walk along the rows of tents, having to weave in and out of the gun emplacements that fill them with a mix of fear and safety. Their eyes look up to the sky as they notice Songbird, with stories of its crew affirming it as a living legend amongst the survivors. Turning the ship and drifting it along the length of the hull, Fluke took it in low and passed over the heads of some of the kids playing, making sure to give them a close enough flyby so the roar of the engine gave them something to get excited about as they all smiled up and pointed, waving maniacally. Cracking into a half smile, he peeled off and headed to the tail end of the ship, where a small tower stood against the sails, guns and propellers. The tower, the hub of the ship, had large glass panes that brimmed with life, allowing an almost completely 360 view of the area. It housed the best and brightest and the leaders of the last bastion of humanity. It housed hope. Pressing a few buttons on a panel in front of him, Fluke's mic lit up. "Ashley, Fluke here. Bringing in Songbird." "Sweet man, take it to the W4. It's all set up for repairs," Ashley responded, his relaxed voice punctuated by the sounds of toking something. "Nice. Gooby didn't stop you smoking in there," Fluke responds as he turns the ship and heads to a new location at the base of the tower. Ashley takes another drag before responding. "Nah, man. What's he gonna do? No one else could organize the shitloads of ships he has like I can," he chuckles before taking another drag and adding, "and I doubt I could do it without being high. This shit is stressful." "I can imagine," Fluke responds as Ashley again chuckles. "All done," Pocket gleefully shouts as she stands with her hands on her hips in front of the large pile of junk that filled the back of the ship. Hollow and Rage, tired by the physical exertion of lugging around the gear and without the limitless supply of energy Pocket seemed to have, collapse onto the floor, breathing heavily. She spins around to face them both and questions, "What's up, guys?" Rage attempts to respond, but all he can manage is a few mismatched words between heavy breaths. "Sky, plane," he wheezes before collapsing onto his back, right in front of Tide, who bursts into laughter. "Ah, Pocket, you've only gone and broke Rage," he muses. Now somehow dirtier than before, Tide walks over to a nearby cloth and begins wiping his hands down. The intercom cracks into life. "Alright guys, you might want to hold on to something, we're landing." Pocket instantly heads over to a chair and jumps in as Hollow and Rage look around, slightly worried. "Hollow, take mine," Tide's voice boomed out in his American drawl as he took a few steps over to the still collapsed Rage and picked him up with ease. "I'll get Rage," he adds, his big smile beaming. Not wasting any time, Hollow rose to his feet and heads over to the other chair, sinking into its large size. Tide holds Rage in one of his thick arms and then takes them both to his side before reaching up and pushing one of his large hands against the roof of the ship. "That'll do," he states before slightly widening his stance and tightening his grip around Rage's midsection. A few seconds later, the craft touches down heavily, shaking the chairs and making some of the pile in the back tumble down as Rage and Tide sway slightly. Yet Tide holds his ground. Releasing his vice-like grip around Rage and letting him drop onto his feet, Tide smiles and heads over to the panel by the door. Pressing a few keys, it swings open, revealing the hangar they've landed in. A dozen engineers litter the room that has huge ship parts around its perimeter, some broken, some new. Pressing a few more keys, a ramp begins to extend out from underneath the open hatch and braces itself against the floor below. Rage and Hollow walk over to their belongings and head over to the ramp, taking a moment to get used to the being on solid ground again. As they wait, Pocket, who has also picked up her own bunny-shaped backpack, pushes past them and happily runs off down the ramp, past the engineers and out the door. Just as she goes through, she bumps into someone coming in from the other way, who stumbles slightly back. Pocket is unfazed and keeps going, shouting "sorry" over her shoulder. Fluke slides down the ladder with his own bag slung across his shoulder and hits the ground. "Hey Rage," he beams happily as he walks over to the top of the ramp where they still stood. "Nice to see you're not dead," he adds, before patting Rage on the back and walking down the ramp. "You know, I wasn't dead when you picked me up," Rage responded, slightly confused. Spinning around to face him whilst walking backwards, Fluke replied, "Oh, I meant Pocket. I was sure she'd get sick of you this time." He turned back round laughing and headed over to the nearby engineer. Rage's face dropped as he turned to Hollow, who was smirking to himself. "He's joking, right? She doesn't really want me dead?" Rage asked, a sense of worry in his voice. Hollow shrugged, still smirking, and walked off the ramp. "Oh, come on guys, seriously," Rage shouted out, catching up with his friend. "I don't know, man," Hollow said, as they both reached the bottom of the ramp and walked towards the door. "What I do know is that I'm looking forward to going to read my book and a cup of tea. But how can someone not like me?" Rage added, still facing a crisis over the joke. Hollow turned to look at him and was about to respond with a sarcastic remark before a strong Polish voice was heard over the speakers in the hangar. "Fluke, Rage, Hollow, report to deck immediately." Its tone official and quite blunt, causing the three to look at each other. "Any idea what this is about?" Hollow asked Rage, who shrugged. "Ugh," Hollow sighed. "Never gonna be able to finish my book," he moaned. "Hey, Tide," Fluke shouted over to Songbird as the burly American came to the hatch at the top of the ramp. "I've got to go do something. You cool to take over repairs?" The usual smile broke over Tide's face as he put his thumb up and responded, "No problem, bro." "Love you, buddy," Fluke replied as he picked up his bag and headed over to Rage and Hollow by the door. "So, shall we go see what we've done wrong then?" he smirked as the three headed out. The deck was a large room at the top of the tower. In center, a huge circular map with holograms projected onto it, and above showed the terrain of the earth beneath them. Around the border of the room, a small amount of people worked on computers, each with various different buttons and keypads controlling the various parts of the Lady Vengeance. The windows stood tall and allowed anyone in the room to stare out for miles around due to its position at the top of the tower. In front of these windows stood a tall man with long ginger hair and a well-trimmed beard. His hands held behind his back, he stood watching the world outside, the world he was in command of, his sharp, thin features marked by glasses and a long, red overcoat that reached down to the floor, his high collar framing his face. His dress sense and posture carried with it a sense of nobility and power, and his eyes carried a weight that only those who had seen horrifying things could understand. His clothing was smart and well kept. A long engraved sword hung from his belt, and a heavy-set pistol from the other side. Duke, he spoke, his thick Polish accent adding to a sense of power and mystery he held. Next to him, on a small blue circle, a holographic figure appeared. Standing the same height as the man, it had a human characteristic and design to it that it almost seemed real, if it wasn't for the occasional flickering and eerie glow it gave off. Similarly dressed in quite regal clothing, the hologram had messy blonde hair and pale skin, standing with a similar posture. "Yes, Gubiak," it responded, its voice deep and soothing with a Finnish accent. "Are they all on their way?" Gubiak responded, eyes still firmly locked on what was outside. "Yes, they're all currently heading up. The 3 of them will arrive in precisely 20 seconds, and the other 2? Slightly longer, about 5 minutes. They were in the workshop." "Good, thank you, Duke." "Any time, my lord," Duke replied, with a sense of jovial humour. Gubiak turned to face him as the hologram smiled, bowed and disappeared. "Sometimes I wonder why Evans gave him that personality," Gubiak muttered to himself as he turns around and heads to the map in the centre of the room. Moments later, the doors on the other side of the room opened as Fluke, Rage and Hollow make their way inside, towards the map. As they reach the map, Gubiak takes a few steps round to get closer to them. "I heard that the building was empty," he stated in his strict matter-of-fact tone. "Well, a hello would have been nice," Fluke sarcastically remarked as Gubiak shot him a glare which quickly shut him up. "No, it was dry. Most we found were a hive of Votors," Hollow spoke, Gubiak taking his attention from Fluke and turning to Hollow. Fluke used his time to head around and prop himself up on a nearby console. "How many?" Gubiak asked. Hollow said 5, Rage quipped before interrupted by a sharp jab to the upper arm. "Ah, you dick," he replied, grasping his injury as Hollow continued talking. "A couple dozen. We blew the building up and burnt what was there, but it seemed pretty infested." Gubiak paused for a moment before heading round to the other side of the map and reaching into the centre. With the movement of his hands it began to shift and change, certain parts becoming larger and entering focus. "That could be a good thing," Gubiak mused. Hollow, slightly confused, questioned, "How can that be a good thing?" From behind them, a voice spoke out. "It means that the Ragicans didn't drain the land yet." Turning around to face the new voice from the door, they spot a young-looking man in a long, white coat and messy brown hair. The coat has rolled-up sleeves and several oil stains and holes in it, and covers thick, leather armour and padding. His dark trousers lead into heavy boots, and he seems to carry a mad genius vibe around him. However, the most distinguishing feature is his left arm, the forearm and hand completely replaced by a well-made robotic prosthetic. Although human in design, it is black and metal, with a built-in touchscreen running along the inside, and cogs can be seen constantly churning and turning inside. However, it moves with the same dexterity and precision that his human arm can. "Evans!" Fluke shouts happily before jumping down from the computer terminal he was using as a seat, running over and embracing him in a strong hug. The scientist seems taken back by the interaction, but has slowly gotten used to it. Pulling back from the hug, Fluke ruffles Evans' already dishevelled hair and smiles. "Man, that new thruster on my ship. Fucking A." Evans smiles at this compliment. However, his modesty is interrupted by the sound of Duke. "Where's my thanks?" he sarcastically remarks, having appeared on a nearby pad by the map. Fluke smiles before walking over to Duke and pointing at him. "Hey, if I could hug you too, Duke, I would." Duke smiles. "Ah, thanks, Fluke. You do treat me better than these two," he said, gesturing to Hollow and Rage, who look a little bit offended at this accusation. "Hey, wow, what the hell does that mean, Duke?" Rage angrily questions. "You blew up my hoverlight," he responds. Rage and Hollow slightly taken aback as they remember that they had forgotten to recollect it. "That hurt, you know," Duke added. "Oh, don't be so melodramatic. You don't feel pain, you're an AI," Rage replied. "I have feelings, though," he mumbled back. Evans let out a large sigh. "Duke, for the last time, you don't. I didn't program you any." "Well, that's just your fault, isn't it?" Duke stated. "Imagine how bad you'd be if I gave you some," Evans added. "Well, I might be able to enjoy those rubbish, soppy films you try to make me watch with you." "I told you not to talk about that, Duke," Evans worriedly responds. "Will everyone shut up?" Gubiak shouted, obviously sick and tired of the bickering. The room fell silent as they all looked over at him. "There is a reason I've told you all to come up here," he stated, after a few seconds of silence. Everyone took a step forward towards the map. "We found a way to take down the spire." The room froze. And there you go. That is the third chapter of Right Where We Belong, written by Captain Fluke, the awesome fanfiction. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. Please leave a like if you have. I'll see you guys next time in the next one. Have a good day.